of course, the law school was a wonderful place for me. And I met a professor named David Crane. And he knew of my great interest in the Nuremberg trials. And we became, I'll never forget the first time I met David. It was at a dinner. And everyone was very enamored. He was a new professor there. We were fascinated by what he had done in Sierra Leone. And I remember looking at David Crane and I said to him, this was a country that was devastated. No health care, no sanitation, no education for kids. Why would anybody care about a war crime trial? And I'll never forget what David said to me. He said, you know, Lowell, he said, at the end of the day, everybody wants to know there's justice in the world. And I was so taken with that. And then I was at the law school for, 4 to 5 years, and a law school alum named Bill Brodsky, who was the chairman of the Chicago Board of Options, was the president of the Hillel board at Syracuse. And the Hillel were struggling financially. And he said, Lowell, he said, I know you love the law school. Bill, by the way, we had a class of 68. He had a classmate named Joe Biden who remained very close. Joe Biden actually did a video when we were honoring Bill Brodsky at a dinner at Syracuse, a law review dinner. And Joe Biden said in that video, he said, you know, the only election I ever lost was for the first year class president to Bill Brodsky. And during my years at the law school, Joe Biden came 3 times to speak at 2 law school graduation and 1 university graduation. I was his handler. I had to make sure that, from the moment he arrived until he left, that he was taken care of. I got to chat with him. I'm not sure he always remembered my name, because every time he'd see me, he'd say, hey, he'd look at me like this, hey man, how you doing? But he used to walk around the law school, talk to all the staff, go see his professors. We'd talk to all the administrative staff, ask them about their families. And when he spoke at graduation, he would shake hands with every law student, have a little something to say to each one. I was so impressed with whatever your political leanings as a human being. I think he had been through so much in his life. He was a very gracious, charismatic, more than I think comes through on TV, and spoke extremely well at these graduation ceremonies. So I sort of am Forrest Gump. I didn't even tell you all the. I tell you one other funny story from the dinner time. I did a dinner once for Donald Peterson, who was the chairman and CEO of the Ford Motor Company, in between Fords. And I flew to Detroit to meet with him about the dinner, and I purposely rented a car from Hertz because Hertz was partially Ford owned in those years. And wouldn't you know, the only car they had on the lot was a Toyota Corolla. And I drove to Ford Motor Company in a Toyota, and the first thing I told Peterson, I said, this is just too funny not to tell him. I said, I can't tell you what I went through trying to drive here in a Ford. He got a big kick out of it. Yeah. I said to Crane, I said, I would love to get a Nuremberg prosecutor. By the way, the one thing I forgot to tell you is in my years working for the Hebrew Union College, I used to do dinners in St. Louis. Yeah. And I did one dinner for Danforth, Bill Danforth, who was the president of Washington University, former chairman of their board, former dean of the medical school. and a fellow named Whitney Harris came to that dinner. And I got to know Whitney Harris because of the dinner. He invited me to his home, gave me a copy of his book, Tyranny on Trial, inscribed it for me. Extraordinary person. Loved meeting him. And so that of course enhanced my interest in Nuremberg. And I said to David, I would love to get somebody here at Syracuse. We could start with a session in the morning with the Jewish community, have them do a master class with law students, and then we had something called the University Lecture Series, which was the biggest lecture series. And he says, we do these interviews. There's this great fellow named Greg Peterson at the Jackson Center, and he had begun to tell me about the Robert H. Jackson Center. He says, I think we can get Henry King because of my association with Case Western. And we brought, and he said we did, and Greg could interview Henry King as a program, and of course that was a fabulous day.
I remember that very well, by the way.
I almost can't talk about that day without getting tears in my eyes, because I don't know how well you remember the night. I mean, we had a full house for Henry King. And in the morning, I don't know if you were at the breakfast in the morning that we had for the Jewish community, but he talked about his first-hand conversations with Albert Speer. And it was so chilling, because he would talk about Speer talking about Hitler. And I remember it the rest of my life. And then I don't know if you remember that night, which was one of the most extraordinary evenings I've ever had. Henry King started crying because I can't believe I'm getting teary-eyed here. Henry King started crying because he couldn't, and he looked at me and he said, "Why are they all standing?" And I looked at him and I said, "Mr. King, they're all standing because the world's a better place for what you did."
No, it was very meaningful, yeah.
So, we had that great event, and then I wanted to find a way to. When I decided, then we talked about doing the dinner with Ben Ferenz in New York City, and Bill Brodsky, that's how you know who Bill Brodsky is. I asked Bill to be the chair of that dinner,
Right.
and he. That was a great event, and I wanted to use it to highlight the Jackson Center. Since because of you and David, we were able to get Ben Ferenz. Look at this. I'm still teary-eyed from Henry King. And Ben, needless to say, getting to know Ben Ferenz a little was extraordinary. What an extraordinary human being. So, as you can tell, I care very deeply about this stuff. And everyone in the room that night was mesmerized. And it was You know, and I'm glad you could be there, and David, and we talked a little about the Jackson Center, and it was at that point that I remember you and Stan Lundeen, and you guys came over and asked me if I would be willing to serve on the Jackson Center board. One of the great privileges of my life.
So as you got on the board, I think you were on for like 8 years.
9 years.
9 years. And still active through the committees.
Yeah.
What's your sense of Jackson, first of all? Because you probably didn't study him much at all.
Correct.
Other than as being part of the Nuremberg trial, which that was sort of bigger than this.
Well, the irony is that I'm studying Jackson now.
Yeah.
I went back to graduate school to get a master's degree in social sciences. And when I started this program, I thought I was going to study more American history related. And I ended up taking a class in international law, human rights, law and justice, violence and peace. I am now at this stage of my life in an academic setting, reading. We actually just 3 weeks ago we had a module on the Nuremberg trials and then the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem, which was very controversial. When I first came to the Jackson Center, I actually understand Jackson better now than I did when I first came on the board, because I have now read more of his court cases. More of the Nuremberg trials were controversial at the time and remain so. Just from what the place of the Nuremberg trials are in modern international law, and I have classmates that struggled. They felt that the Nuremberg trials were a function of victor's justice, which is a common claim. Of course, that can be dispelled in a number of ways. But I mean, the trials were not were imperfect, but nevertheless a monument to justice in the world. But when I came on board, in answering your question, I had always been I was always a court watcher. I was always interested in presidential history and in court history. So but I only knew Jackson peripherally. But I was aware of his dissent in Korematsu, having gone to law school. I was aware of the West Virginia case, having gone to law school. I was aware of Brown because of law school. But I did not fully appreciate Robert Jackson as a visionary, as a force on the court, as his gift as a writer, So I of course, because of my interest in Nuremberg, I knew of his role at Nuremberg, but did not fully appreciate his import in American history, in international law, until I got involved with the Jackson Center.
I remember seeing you for the very first time. We talked about this even last night at an international humanitarian law dialogue.
Right.
At Chautauqua.
Right.
I remember you sitting in a wicker chair, and
David Crane invited me. Right.
Yeah, and I just kind of like, if you wonder who he is, because you kind of knew it's a small community, so you kind of know everybody. And there you were with
and you do know everybody.
And so all of a sudden I did, but I didn't know you. So of course that led to getting the chance to meet you and understand, which then led to everything else that you just talked about. But did David kind of say, hey, you might enjoy hanging around, or did you just sort of ab initio?
No, he asked me to come to the dialogues.
Okay.
He wanted, he thought he knew of my interest. He said, you'll meet, when I was there, Ben Ferenz was there. I met Bill Kaming, who was also at Nuremberg. Michael Scharf was there. I just got finished reading in graduate school a chapter that Michael Scharf wrote about Robert Jackson in the book, The Founders.
Right, yeah.
Right. So we've actually been studying that book. I mean, it's so ironic that, so I got to meet Scharf there, and I'm trying to think who else was there. Well, we just finished another section on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, and just finished reading an analysis of that experience by Goldstone. And he was there. Lila Sadat was there. This was a who's who.
No question.
And and of course the dialogues are now part of Case Western.
Right.
I served 9 years on the board. I think it's good for boards to have turnover, having been someone that has created boards and trained boards. I also said to our current president at one point, I said, I think I bring certain things to the board, but I would probably not serve on a board that had me as a member, because you need individuals that bring significant resources. That I work in a certain corner of the world, and you need a number of individuals on this board that can raise its profile in ways that I don't think I can. And yet, I don't know, maybe I'm selling myself short, because we're about to talk about how we can do a dinner for the Robert H. Jackson Center. You probably don't even know this. But I'm preparing an entire briefing for the board on how dinners are done.
Terrific.
And we've always dabbled in this, and we've talked about it from a distance. But if we can do a dinner for a small Hillel in Syracuse, New York, we won't go into that now, but so, they asked me to continue on the development committee, and I had always hoped that the Robert H. Jackson Center would transcend Western New York. And there are ways to do that, and we're not there yet. But I think there are ways to do that, because the import of Robert Jackson far transcends Frewsburg and Jamestown and even Washington, D.C. Yes.
Any kind of one or two sort of a legacy moments for you where you said, I remember
sure.
such and such? Or...
Well, certainly the visit of Chief Justice Roberts. The fact that the current court holds Jackson in such reverence and will always hold him in reverence. I don't think Robert H. Jackson will ever go out of style. And I think there are other Supreme Court justices. I mean, most people cannot name the 9 justices sitting on the Supreme Court. But I think that for generations to come, every member who comes to that court will, and I think because of his legacy, he will transcend in popular imagination beyond the court other justices who've sort of fallen by the wayside in terms of their importance beyond their legal decisions. But certainly John Roberts' visit, the impact it had on this community, the fact that other justices come here when they come to this part of the world to pay tribute, I think, that certainly was, it has nothing to do with what side of the aisle they're on, or their legal strategies, or their how they view the judicial process. A Chief Justice is a Chief Justice.
Right.
So that certainly is a highlight. I think I've also attended, I was here when Bob Woodward was interviewed by Mark Russell, who's been a great friend to the Jackson Center. Woodward has his own place in American history. I think the fact that we continue to attract people of this caliber speaks volumes about the importance of this place. And we need a Jackson Center.
And I'm glad to have had a Lowell Lustig as part of it and continuing to be part of it. So thank you very much.
You even got me teary-eyed.